Someone in your life right now is counting on you to say yes. Not because you want to, not because you have the time, not because it's good for you, but because you always say yes. Because you've trained the people around you to expect it. Because somewhere along the way, you decided that being needed was the same thing as being valued, and that keeping the peace was the same thing as living well. It isn't. There is a version of you that is respected without being feared, generous without being drained, dependable without being exploited, present without being consumed. That version of you isn't softer, it isn't harder either. It is simply good, not nice, good. And there is a difference that quietly shapes every relationship, every decision, and every outcome in your life. This book is about that. Chapter 1. Nice versus good. The difference that changes everything. Picture a manager named Daniel, mid-30s, works for a logistics company in Ohio. His team likes him. His boss praises his attitude. He never misses a birthday card, never raises his voice, never pushes back in a meeting, even when he knows the plan is flawed. When his colleague takes credit for his work, again, Daniel laughs it off. When his boss piles a third project onto his already overloaded week, Daniel says, "No problem, I'll figure it out." And he does, every time. Until one Tuesday morning, sitting in his car in the parking garage, he realizes he's been sitting there for 20 minutes, unable to make himself walk inside. Daniel is one of the nicest people in that building. He is also quietly disappearing. Here's the question nobody asks him, nobody asks any of us early enough. Is nice the same thing as good? The answer is no. And the gap between those two words is where a lot of lives quietly go wrong. Nice is about perception. It is the management of how others see you, feel around you, and respond to you. Nice is socially intelligent, often strategic, and at its worst, it is a mask worn so long that the person wearing it forgets it's there. Nice avoids conflict. Nice gives the answer that maintains harmony, even when harmony is a lie. Nice says yes to protect itself from the discomfort of saying no. Nice is performing. Nice is exhausting. Good is something else entirely. Good is about character. It is the alignment between what you believe is right and what you actually do, even when nobody is watching, even when it costs you something, even when the room goes quiet. A good person tells a hard truth with care, rather than a comfortable lie with a smile. A good person keeps a commitment not because they're afraid of disappointing someone, but because their word means something to them. A good person says no when no is the honest answer, not because they're selfish, but because they respect both themselves and the person they're speaking to enough to be real. Notice the weight of that distinction. When you tell someone what they want to hear, you are not protecting them. You are protecting yourself from their reaction, their disappointment, their judgment. That impulse feels selfless. It is not. Real goodness requires something nice never demands: courage. Most of us were not taught this distinction growing up. We were taught to be polite, to smooth things over, to keep the peace. Those are useful social skills. They become dangerous personal philosophies. When being liked becomes the primary metric of success in your relationships, at work, at home, with friends, you begin making decisions that serve the image rather than the life. You say yes when you mean no. You agree when you disagree. You shrink your opinions to fit the shape of the room. And over time, the person in that room becomes less and less recognizable as you. Here is what this costs you specifically. Every time you choose nice over good, you trade a small piece of clarity for a temporary feeling of safety. That trade seems reasonable in the moment. One awkward conversation avoided, one relationship kept smooth for another week. But those trades accumulate. They accumulate into resentment, quiet, slow burning, and eventually corrosive. They accumulate into a life where people trust your agreeableness, but not your judgment, where you are well liked, but not deeply respected, where you are present everywhere and yet somehow absent from the decisions that matter. Daniel, still sitting in that parking garage, is experiencing the compound interest of 1,000 small trades. Not one dramatic failure, just the slow erosion of a man who chose niceness over truth so consistently that he no longer knows what he actually thinks, wants, or needs. The path out is not to become cold. It is not to become blunt, difficult, or indifferent to the feelings of others. Those are not signs of strength. They are simply different kinds of social dysfunction. The goal is not to stop caring. The goal is to care more accurately, to care about what is true, what is right, what is sustainable, rather than only caring about what is comfortable in the next 5 minutes. Being good means you can walk into a difficult conversation and stay in it. It means your yes is worth something because your no is real. It means the people who depend on you can depend on what you say, not just on the fact that you will tell them what they want to hear. That is the foundation. Everything in this book builds from here. But before we can step into that foundation, we need to understand how we ended up so far from it, because most of us didn't choose niceness deliberately. It was chosen for us by something older, deeper, and far more invisible than a bad habit. Chapter 2. Why being liked became your full-time job. Think about the last time you disagreed with someone in a meeting and said nothing. Or the last time a friend asked for your honest opinion and you gave them a softer version of the truth. Or the last time someone treated you poorly and you let it go, not because you genuinely processed it, but because confronting it felt like too much risk. Now ask yourself honestly, when did keeping people comfortable become this important to you? It didn't start last year. It didn't start in your last job or your last relationship. It started much earlier, in rooms you barely remember, with people whose approval felt like oxygen. Human beings are wired for belonging. That is not a weakness. For most of human history, being accepted by your group was a survival mechanism. Rejection didn't just sting, it had real consequences. So the brain learned very early to monitor social signals, to adjust behavior based on feedback, to prioritize being included over being authentic. That instinct is ancient, and in many ways it still runs your daily decisions, even though the stakes are nothing like they used to be. Here's where it gets personal. For most high-achieving Americans, the people who hustle, who build, who carry responsibility, this wiring got reinforced in specific and powerful ways. Maybe you were the child who kept the peace in a complicated household, the one who read the room before anyone else did and adjusted accordingly. Maybe you were praised for being easy, cooperative, low maintenance. Maybe the message you received, spoken or unspoken, was that your value to the people around you was directly tied to how little friction you created. That message became a strategy, and the strategy became an identity. By the time you entered the workforce, you had already logged thousands of hours practicing the art of social calibration. You knew how to make a room comfortable. You knew how to read what someone wanted to hear. You knew how to position your real opinions so they went down easier, or how to swallow them entirely when the risk felt too high. You were good at it, and being good at something feels like evidence that it belongs in your life. But here is what nobody tells you about being skilled at managing other people's comfort. It scales in the wrong direction. Early in your career, in your early relationships, being agreeable and easy to work with opens doors. It earns goodwill. It gets you invited back. And so you keep doing it because it works. What you don't notice is the slow shift happening underneath. You stop being agreeable because it serves a purpose. You become agreeable because it feels unsafe to be anything else. The strategy that once served you starts to run you. This is the moment, and most people miss it completely, when a social skill becomes a psychological cage. Once being liked becomes the primary signal by which you measure your safety in a relationship, everything changes. Your opinions become negotiations. Your boundaries become requests you're afraid to make. Your energy gets redirected away from your own goals and toward the constant invisible labor of monitoring how others feel about you. You start optimizing for approval, the way a business optimizes for a metric, relentlessly, automatically, at the expense of everything else. And the cruel irony? It doesn't even work. People don't deeply trust the person who always agrees with them. They enjoy them, certainly. They find them comfortable to be around. But trust, real trust, the kind that builds lasting professional relationships and genuine friendships, is built on the belief that someone will tell you the truth. When you are known for your agreeableness, people stop bringing you their real problems. They stop asking for your honest read on things. They know the answer will be shaped around their feelings rather than around reality. You become pleasant company rather than a trusted voice. You wanted connection. You built a performance instead. There is a particular exhaustion that comes with this way of living. It is not the tiredness of hard work. That exhaustion carries a sense of purpose. This is the tiredness of constant vigilance, of always having one eye on how you're landing, how the room is reading you, whether the smile across the table is genuine or slightly cooled. It is the tiredness of a person who has been performing safety rather than inhabiting it. And beneath that exhaustion, if you sit quietly with it, is something that feels uncomfortably close to grief. The grief of a person who has been present in their own life, showing up, working hard, staying available, and yet somehow feels unseen. Because you are unseen. The version of you that shows up is curated for consumption. The real one is still waiting in the parking garage. Recognizing this pattern is not a reason for shame. It is a reason for precision. You adopted this strategy because it made sense given what you knew and what you needed at the time. The question is whether it still makes sense now, given who you are, what you're building, and what you actually want from the people in your life. The answer for most people reading this book is no. Releasing the need to be liked by everyone does not mean becoming unlikable. It means becoming legible. It means the people who choose to be in your life are choosing the real version, not the performance. That kind of connection is rarer, and it is worth infinitely more. But before you can build it, you need to understand what the performance has been costing you, not in the abstract, in the actual countable currency of your daily life. That accounting starts in the next chapter. Chapter 3. The Hidden Tax on Overgivers. There is a particular kind of person that every workplace, every family, and every social circle quietly relies on. You probably know one. You might be one. They are the person who always picks up the slack, who remembers everyone's preferences, anticipates every need, says yes before the ask is even finished. They are dependable in the way that infrastructure is dependable, so consistently present that no one thinks to appreciate it until it breaks down. Everyone counts on them. Almost no one considers what it costs them. That cost is real. It has a name, and it is time to put a number on it. Think of your daily energy, your focus, your emotional bandwidth, your physical presence, your time as a finite resource. Not infinite, not replenishable on demand, finite. Every morning you wake up with a set amount. Every decision you make, every conversation you have, every obligation you carry draws from that reserve. The question is not whether it gets spent. It always gets spent. The question is whether you are the one deciding where it goes. For overgivers, the answer is almost always no. The overgiver's calendar fills up not with their own priorities, but with everyone else's urgency. Their mental bandwidth is occupied not with their own goals, but with monitoring everyone else's emotional state. They carry a silent, invisible inventory. Who needs what? Who is upset about what? Whose feelings need managing? Whose expectations need meeting? This inventory runs in the background of every conversation, every decision, every quiet moment that might have otherwise been used for rest, reflection, or focused work. This is the hidden tax, and it compounds daily. Here's what makes it so hard to see. Overgiving is usually motivated by something genuinely good: generosity, loyalty, a real desire to be helpful and to show up for the people you care about. These are not character flaws, they are strengths misapplied. When generosity becomes reflexive rather than intentional, when it operates without any internal filter of sustainability or fairness, it stops being generosity. It becomes self-erasure dressed in the language of virtue. Consider Marcus, a 34-year-old entrepreneur running a small logistics consulting firm in Atlanta. He has 3 employees, a growing client list, and a reputation for being the guy who figures it out. Clients call him for non-billable advice constantly. Friends reach out when they need introductions, favors, second opinions. Family members assume he has flexibility because he works for himself. And Marcus, generous, capable, good-hearted Marcus, says yes every time because he can, because he's good at helping, because saying no feels like letting people down. By the time Marcus sits down to work on his actual business, on the strategy, the growth, the work that only he can do, his tank is half empty before he started. He is present for everyone else's life. He is distracted from his own. And here's the part that cuts deepest. The people Marcus helps most rarely ask whether he's okay, not because they are unkind. Most of them genuinely care about him, but because he has trained them through consistent behavior to see him as a resource rather than a person with limits. You teach people how to treat you, and overgivers teach the lesson quietly through every unreturned sacrifice they normalize. The hidden tax also shows up in decision quality. When your mental bandwidth is consumed by managing the expectations and emotions of others, you have less capacity for the thinking that actually moves your life forward. The deep work, the strategic thinking, the clear-eyed evaluation of your own path, all of it requires a quietness of mind that is impossible when you are always on call for someone else's comfort. This is not a small cost. Research in cognitive performance consistently shows that divided attention produces worse outcomes than focused attention. When your mental background is occupied with the running inventory of other people's needs, your foreground thinking is compromised. You make smaller decisions. You play a shorter game. You settle for what's in front of you rather than designing what could be ahead of you. So what does the path forward look like? It begins with a single foundational shift in how you understand generosity. True generosity, the kind that is sustainable, that actually serves people well over the long term, must come from surplus, not from sacrifice. When you give from a depleted reserve, you are not being generous. You are accruing a debt that you will eventually collect through resentment, withdrawal, or breakdown. Sustainable giving requires that you protect the source. This is not selfishness, it is stewardship. Think about what you are actually responsible for in this life: your work, your family, your purpose, your continued ability to function and contribute. These things require you to be whole. They require reserves. They require that you not spend yourself into depletion on requests that could have been declined, expectations that were never agreed to, and obligations that were assumed rather than chosen. Starting today, begin asking one question before you say yes to any significant request of your time, energy, or emotional investment. Is this coming from my surplus, or is this coming from my reserve? If it is from your surplus, give freely and gladly. If it is from your reserve, pause. That pause is not cruelty. That pause is the beginning of an honest relationship with your own capacity. And honest relationships, even with yourself, are always where the better life starts. You cannot pour from an empty vessel, and the people who truly need you need the full version. But protecting your energy is only part of the equation. The other part is about your word and what happens when you've been. Chapter 4. Your word is a currency. Stop inflating it. Imagine a currency that used to mean something. People saved it, planned around it, made decisions based on its value. Then, slowly, more of it entered circulation than was ever backed by anything real. The supply grew. The value dropped. People began to assume that what they were being given was worth less than face value, and they started accounting for that assumption before any exchange even happened. That is what happens to your word when you overcommit. Every time you say yes and don't follow through, you make a small withdrawal from the account of your credibility. 1 withdrawal is recoverable, 5 is a pattern, 20 is a reputation, and reputations, once they solidify, are extraordinarily difficult to reverse because people stop telling you when they've adjusted their expectations of you. They simply adjust, quietly, without announcement. This is one of the most silent and damaging consequences of the people-pleasing habit. The yes that felt kind in the moment, the yes that avoided an uncomfortable conversation, that kept someone's mood elevated, that made you seem capable and available and generous, that yes had a cost that wasn't visible at the moment of delivery. The cost showed up later, when you couldn't do what you said you'd do, or when you did it, but resentfully at half capacity 3 days later than promised. The relationship absorbed that cost. Your reputation absorbed that cost. And because no one sat you down to explain what was happening, you continued the pattern, collecting obligations you couldn't honor and wondering why the people around you seemed to trust your enthusiasm but hedge against your follow-through. Here is the deeper problem. When your word loses value, your confidence follows. Most people don't connect these two things, but they are directly linked. Integrity, the alignment between what you say and what you do, is not just a social asset, it is a psychological one. Every kept commitment is a small act of self-respect. It is evidence that you can rely on yourself. Over time, that evidence builds into a quiet, stable confidence, the kind that doesn't need external validation because it is rooted in internal consistency. You know you do what you say. That knowledge is solid ground. Every broken commitment chips away at that ground, not dramatically, not in a way you might consciously notice, but the cumulative effect is a subtle erosion of self-trust. And a person who doesn't fully trust themselves becomes hesitant, overqualified, and prone to exactly the kind of approval-seeking behavior that creates the problem in the first place. It is a cycle with one clean exit point: honesty before the yes. Consider what it would mean to treat your commitments the way a disciplined business person treats capital. You do not invest money you do not have. You do not write checks against accounts that are empty. You understand that over-leveraging feels powerful in the short term and is catastrophic in the long term. The same logic applies to your word. A commitment is a promise drawn against the account of your future time, energy, and attention. Before you make it, the honest question is, do I actually have this to give? This requires a skill that most overgivers are remarkably underdeveloped in, the skill of accurate self-assessment in real time. When someone makes a request and looks at you with expectation, the emotional pressure to say yes is immediate. The inconvenience of saying yes, the time it will cost, the other priorities it will displace, the resentment it might quietly build, is abstract and future-dated. The human brain, under social pressure, consistently underweights abstract future costs against immediate social relief. This is not a character flaw, it is biology, but understanding it gives you a lever. The lever is a pause. Before committing, especially to anything that requires more than a small investment of your time or attention, build a practice of pausing before speaking, not dramatically, not in a way that creates anxiety in the other person. Simply, let me check my schedule and get back to you. Or, I want to make sure I can actually do this well before I commit. These are not excuses. They are evidence of a person who takes their word seriously. And here is what happens when you start operating this way consistently. The people in your life begin to recalibrate their expectations upward. When you say yes, they believe it. They plan around it. They experience your commitment as real and solid because it is backed by your genuine assessment rather than by your desire to avoid awkwardness. A smaller number of yeses honored completely builds more relational equity than a large number of yeses honored inconsistently, every time. The quality of your word is also a signal to the professional world. In business relationships, in collaborative projects, in leadership contexts, the person who underpromises and over-delivers is trusted with more, not because they are more talented, because they are more predictable in the best possible way. Reliability in the professional world is a rare and compounding asset. But none of this is possible if you cannot tolerate the temporary discomfort of saying no, or not yet, or let me think about it. And that discomfort, that specific, particular, seemingly small moment of tension before an honest answer, that. Chapter 5. The Art of the Uncomfortable Pause. There is a moment that most people rush past without realizing how much it costs them. Someone asks you something, a favor, a commitment, an opinion, a response to a situation that carries emotional weight, and before you have even fully processed the question, something inside you has already begun composing the answer, not the honest answer, but the safe one, the one that will land well, the one that will keep the temperature in the room where it is. That rush, that reflexive sprint toward comfort is one of the most expensive habits a person can have. The pause before an honest answer is uncomfortable for a very specific reason. In the silence between a question and a response, the other person's expectation hangs in the air unresolved. And for someone trained to manage other people's emotions, unresolved expectation feels dangerous. It feels like the beginning of disappointment. So the instinct is to resolve it quickly, to fill the silence, even at the cost of accuracy, honesty, or your own best interest. What you need to understand is this. The discomfort in that pause is not a warning signal. It is a competence signal. It is the feeling of someone who is actually thinking before they speak. That feeling is unfamiliar to the approval-conditioned mind, which interprets any relational discomfort as a problem to be solved. But the pause is not a problem. The pause is the solution. Here is what the pause does that the rushed answer never can. First, it creates space for accuracy. When you slow down before responding, you give your mind a chance to assess what is actually true, what you actually think, what you actually have to offer, what you actually want to commit to. This sounds obvious. It is almost never practiced. Most people, under social pressure, respond to what they think is being asked of them rather than to what they genuinely think or feel. The pause interrupts that pattern. Second, it signals respect. When you pause before answering a serious question, you communicate that the question deserves real thought. People, even if they don't articulate it, feel the difference between someone who considered them and someone who processed them. A thoughtful pause before a considered answer is more honoring to the person asking than an instant yes that evaporates within the week. Third, and perhaps most importantly, it changes your relationship to pressure. Every time you resist the pull to rush toward the comfortable answer, you build tolerance for relational discomfort. You discover in real time that the silence does not destroy the relationship, that the other person does not collapse, that the world does not end because you took 30 seconds to think. These discoveries are experiential. You cannot read your way into them. You have to practice them in actual moments with actual people. Think about how this plays out in a professional context. A senior colleague asks you to take on a project that would genuinely overload your current schedule. The old response is immediate. Sure, I'll make it work. What follows is 2 weeks of substandard output, internal resentment, and a subtle erosion of your belief that you can advocate for yourself. The new response is a pause, a visible, calm, unapologetic pause, followed by, I want to give this the attention it deserves, Let me look at what I have on my plate and come back to you by end of day with a realistic answer. Notice what that response does. It demonstrates competence. It communicates self-awareness. It promises a real answer rather than a reflexive one. And it protects both the quality of the work and the quality of the relationship, because the answer you give after honest reflection is one you can actually stand behind. The same principle applies in personal relationships. A family member asks you to take on a responsibility you're not sure you can handle well. A friend asks for an opinion you know they actually don't want to hear. A partner raises a concern that requires a real answer rather than an automatic reassurance. In every one of these moments, the pause is the act of taking both yourself and the other person seriously enough to respond with what is true rather than what is easy. There is a specific technique worth building into your practice. Before any response that involves a commitment of your time, a significant opinion, or an emotionally loaded answer, breathe first. Not performatively, not in a way that draws attention. Simply breathe and let the breath create 1 second of space between the question and your response. In that second, ask yourself one question. Is what I'm about to say actually true? If the answer is yes, speak. If the answer is no, or not fully, or I'm not sure, pause longer. Say, give me a moment to think about that. You are allowed to think. You are allowed to need time. These are not social failures. They are signs of a person who respects the weight of their own words. Over time, as you practice this, something shifts in how others perceive you. You become the person whose opinions are sought because they are known to reflect real thinking. You become the professional whose commitments are trusted because they are known to be considered. You become the friend, the partner, the colleague whose responses carry weight because they are never carelessly given. That reputation for thoughtfulness, for reliability, for honest engagement is built one pause at a time. And when you finally learn to hold that pause without panic, you are ready for what comes next. Because the next step is not just choosing your words carefully. It is understanding that how you treat people, where you draw the line between what you will and will not accept, is not a restriction on love. It is one of the deepest expressions of it.
Chapter 6. Boundaries are a love language. The word boundary has been so overused, so therapized, so wrapped in the language of self-care culture that many Americans, especially working professionals who pride themselves on being practical, have quietly dismissed it as soft, abstract, the kind of concept that belongs in a weekend retreat, not in a real conversation about how to build a better life. That dismissal is a mistake. And it is costing you relationships you actually value. Here is what a boundary actually is, stripped of all the cultural packaging. It is a clear statement of what you will and will not participate in. It is not a wall, it is not a punishment, it is not a declaration of hostility. It is simply the honest communication of where you stand and what you need in order to remain genuinely present in a relationship rather than performing presence while quietly pulling away. Think about the last relationship in your life, professional or personal, where something wasn't working, where a pattern existed that drained you, frustrated you, or made you feel taken for granted. Did you address it clearly and directly, or did you manage it silently? Withdrawing a little, investing less, becoming slightly less available, while maintaining the surface appearance of engagement. Most people choose the second option, not because they are cowardly, but because they were never taught that honest communication about what they need is a legitimate act. They were taught to accommodate, to adjust, to make it work. And so when something isn't working, they make micro withdrawals rather than direct requests, and the relationship slowly hollows out from the inside, while everyone pretends the structure is still solid. A boundary, delivered clearly and with genuine care, does the opposite. It keeps the relationship real. Consider what happens in a close friendship when one person is consistently doing more reaching out, more accommodating schedule conflicts, more emotional labor. Without a boundary conversation, the giving person slowly builds resentment, while the taking person remains genuinely unaware that anything is wrong. They are not villainous, they simply haven't been told. And the friendship, which might have been correctable with one honest conversation, ends not with a fight, but with a gradual cooling that neither person fully understands. The boundary conversation, delivered early and with warmth, would have sounded something like, "I've noticed I'm usually the one reaching out, and I want to be honest with you because I value this friendship. I need it to feel a little more mutual." That sentence is not an attack, it is an invitation. It says, "I care about this enough to be real with you." It offers the other person the chance to show up differently, and it keeps the relationship honest. This is why boundaries are, in the truest sense, an act of love. When you refuse to set boundaries with people you care about, you are not protecting them from discomfort. You are protecting yourself from a conversation. And in doing so, you are denying them the information they need to be a better friend, a better partner, a better colleague. You are in effect deciding that your short-term comfort matters more than their long-term growth and your long-term relationship. That is not generosity. That is a quiet form of control dressed up as kindness. Now, let's address the fear, because it is real and it deserves respect. The fear is that expressing a limit will be received as rejection, that saying, "I can't keep doing this," will be heard as, "I don't care about you," that drawing a line will push people away rather than draw them closer. This fear is understandable. It is also, in most cases, wrong, and here is how you can test it. The people in your life who respond to an honest, respectful expression of your needs by withdrawing, punishing, or guilting you are communicating something important. They were not in relationship with you. They were in relationship with your compliance. And that is not a relationship worth preserving at the cost of your integrity. The people who respond to your honesty by listening, adjusting, and staying, those are your actual relationships. Those are the ones worth every uncomfortable conversation it takes to keep them real. Practically, setting a boundary does not require a speech. It does not require an explanation long enough to justify your right to exist. It requires clarity and warmth in equal measure. "I'm not able to take on more than I've already committed to this month" is a complete sentence. "I need our conversations to stay respectful, even when we disagree," is a complete sentence. You do not have to argue for your own limits. You only have to name them. And here is the quiet, lasting power of this practice. When you begin to communicate your limits clearly, the anxiety that comes from not communicating them dissolves. The low-grade tension that lives in every relationship where something unspoken exists, it lifts. Not immediately, not dramatically, but steadily, as honesty replaces management and clarity replaces performance. You become a person who can be fully present because you are not carrying a backlog of unspoken resentments. You become a person whose presence is genuine because it is chosen rather than obligated. You become, in the fullest sense, someone it is actually possible to be close to. That is what boundaries make possible, not distance, depth. But even when your limits are clear, there is another trap waiting, one that catches even the most self-aware overgivers, and it is the habit of stepping in to carry other people's emotional weight when they never asked you to. That habit has a cost all its own.
Chapter 7. Stop managing other people's emotions for them. There is a gesture so common, so reflexively kind, that it almost never gets examined. Someone is upset, a colleague, a friend, a family member, and before they have finished expressing what they feel, you are already moving, softening the blow, offering reassurance, finding the silver lining, redirecting the conversation towards something more comfortable, doing, in short, everything in your power to make the discomfort in the room go away. You probably learned to do this very early, and you are very good at it. The problem is not the impulse toward kindness. The problem is what this kind of intervention costs the other person and what it reveals about what you are actually managing. When you rush in to soothe someone's discomfort before they've had the chance to fully experience and process it, you are not helping them, you are helping yourself. You are resolving your own discomfort at the sight of their distress. The action feels outward-facing. It is, at its root, self-protective. And when it becomes habitual, it quietly steals something from the people you care about, their capacity to develop their own emotional resilience. Think about what it means to sit with a difficult feeling, disappointment, frustration, grief, failure. These emotions, when given space, do something important. They process, they clarify, they teach. The person who sits with their own frustration long enough to understand it emerges from that experience with something real, self-knowledge, emotional muscle, a clearer sense of what they value and what they need. That growth only happens in the space between the feeling and the resolution. When you collapse that space, when you rush in to make it better before the processing can occur, you take that space away. You mean well. The effect is real regardless. This pattern shows up with particular clarity in parenting, but it is equally visible in friendships, partnerships, and professional relationships. The manager who steps in to solve every problem before the team member has had the chance to struggle with it produces team members who cannot solve problems independently. The friend who always has the reassurance ready before the tears have dried produces a friendship where the difficult emotions never actually get examined. The partner who smooths every rough edge produces a relationship where real conversations get replaced by careful choreography. Genuine support looks different from management. Genuine support says, I am here. I am not going anywhere. You do not have to feel something different for me to stay present. That kind of presence, steady, non-fixing, non-rushing, is far more sustaining than the most well-crafted reassurance. It communicates something the managed version cannot. I trust you to handle this. There is a version of emotional caretaking that is rooted in a deep, unexamined belief that the people around you are fragile, that they cannot handle the truth, handle disappointment, handle your honest response to their situation, that they need you to cushion reality for them. This belief is rarely spoken aloud. It operates invisibly, shaping every interaction, and it is, in most cases, both inaccurate and quietly disrespectful. The people in your life, your friends, your colleagues, your partner, your children who are old enough to bear age-appropriate difficulty are more capable than your anxiety gives them credit for. When you manage their emotions, you are operating from a script that casts them as fragile and you as necessary. That script serves your need to be needed far more than it serves their actual growth. Stepping back from that script is not abandonment, it is respect. Practically, this shift looks like learning to sit quietly in someone's discomfort without moving to fix it. To say, I hear you, and then wait, rather than, I hear you, but here's the silver lining. To ask, what do you need right now, rather than assuming you already know. To let a hard silence exist without rushing to fill it. These are small adjustments. Their effects are large. You will notice that when you stop managing, people reveal more. When they are not receiving your carefully crafted softening, they have to look inward rather than outward for their processing. And when that processing happens, they often arrive somewhere more real, more self-aware, and more equipped than they would have reached with your help. You will also notice something shifting in you. The exhaustion that comes from carrying the emotional weight of every room you enter begins to lift. You discover that you can care about someone's pain without being responsible for erasing it. That distinction is not callousness. It is the beginning of mature love, the kind that serves the person's growth rather than your need to feel indispensable. There is one more benefit worth naming. When you stop managing other people's emotions, you create the conditions for authentic relationships. Because a relationship in which you are always performing the role of the soother, always softening, always adjusting, always making it easier, is a relationship built on a performance, and performances end. The relationship that can survive honesty, can survive discomfort, can survive one person saying, I trust you to handle this, that relationship is built on something lasting. You became someone who manages emotion because you once were in a situation where managing it felt necessary. You are likely not in that situation anymore. The question is whether you are willing to update the strategy to match the life you actually have now. And when you do, when you finally step back from the role of emotional manager, something interesting happens. The space you were filling with other people's feelings begins to fill with your own presence, your own clarity, your own quiet, growing strength. That strength has a name, and it's time to build it deliberately. Chapter 8. Become quietly formidable. There is a quality possessed by certain people that is difficult to define, but immediately felt in any room they enter. It is not loudness. It is not aggression. It is not the performance of confidence, the booming voice, the expansive posture, the constant assertion of presence. It is something calmer than all of that, something more stable, a quality that says without words, I know who I am, I know what I stand for, and I am not available to be moved from either of those things by social pressure, approval, or the shifting moods of the people around me. That quality is quiet formidability, and it is built, not found. Most people spend their lives chasing a visible kind of strength, the kind that impresses, that commands attention, that generates external validation. They want to be seen as powerful. But the most genuinely powerful people in any room are rarely the most visibly powerful. They are the ones whose composure does not waver when challenged, whose opinion does not shift with the wind of consensus, whose silence in a heated moment carries more weight than anyone else's words. This kind of strength is built through a series of private choices made consistently over time. The first is the choice of self-knowledge over self-presentation. The quietly formidable person has done the harder work of understanding who they actually are, their real values, their genuine strengths, their actual limits, rather than simply managing how they appear. This is uncomfortable work. It requires honesty about the places where you have been performing rather than living. But it produces something that performance never can. A stable internal foundation that does not depend on anyone else's approval to remain solid. The second choice is clarity of standards. A formidable person knows what they will and will not accept in their work, in their relationships, in the way they spend their time and energy, and they have made those standards explicit to themselves before anyone else tests them. This matters enormously, because when the test comes, and it always comes, the person without pre-established standards makes the decision under pressure, which almost always means making a worse decision. The person with clear, considered standards simply applies what they already know. No drama, no negotiation, no resentment. The third choice is the consistent practice of doing what you said you would do when no one is watching. This sounds simple. It is the most countercultural thing in this book. We live in an environment saturated with shortcuts, with optics, with the temptation to invest more in appearance than in substance. The quietly formidable person bets on substance, every time, in private, where no one is keeping score. And because they do, their public presence is the authentic extension of their private character, rather than a curated performance of it. People sense that difference. They trust it. Think about the professionals you have encountered in your career who possessed this quality. They probably weren't the loudest person in the meeting. They were the person whose input, when offered, landed with unusual weight, because it was known to be considered, honest, and uninfluenced by politics. They were the person you went to when you needed a real answer rather than a comfortable one. They were the person who, when challenged unfairly, did not escalate and did not collapse, who simply held their position with a composure that made the challenge look small by comparison. That composure is a practice. It is built through the accumulated experience of every time you chose honesty over performance, every boundary you held when it would have been easier to yield, every uncomfortable pause you sat in rather than rushing to fill, every time you gave from your genuine surplus rather than depleting yourself to meet someone else's expectation. The work of the previous chapters, understanding the difference between nice and good, releasing the need to be universally liked, protecting your energy, honoring your word, sitting in the uncomfortable pause, setting clear limits, trusting others to handle their own emotions, all of that is the training ground for this. Quiet formidability is not a destination, it is a direction. It is what you become when you consistently choose integrity over approval, depth over breadth, and presence over performance. It is the accumulated credibility of a life lived with deliberate honesty. Here is what it feels like from the inside when you begin to inhabit it. Decisions become cleaner. When your self-knowledge is real and your standards are clear, most decisions resolve relatively quickly, not because they are always easy, but because the framework for making them is already in place. You spend less time seeking external validation before acting because you have developed sufficient trust in your own judgment. Relationships become more selective and more nourishing. When you are no longer performing for approval, you stop attracting people who were only there for the performance. The relationships that remain are the ones built on something real, mutual respect, honest exchange, genuine alignment. Fewer, yes, incomparably better. And your work, whatever form it takes, however you build your livelihood and your purpose, deepens. The person who is not draining their energy on approval management has more of it available for the actual work, for the creative thinking, the focused execution, the patient building that produces lasting results rather than impressive optics. This is the life that becomes available on the other side of niceness. Not easier necessarily, but cleaner, truer, more yours. There is one question worth sitting with as this chapter closes. In the areas of your life where you are most drained, most resentful, most performing, what would a quietly formidable person do differently? You already know the answer. The next chapter is about what it takes to bring the people who matter with you as you step into it.
Chapter 9. The relationships that survive this version of you. Here is a truth about personal growth that almost no one warns you about. When you change, not everyone in your life will celebrate it. Some will be confused. Some will be uncomfortable. Some will, consciously or not, apply pressure to pull you back toward the version of you they were accustomed to. The version that said yes easily, that agreed readily, that managed their feelings, absorbed their overflow, and never cost them the discomfort of your honesty. This is not because the people in your life are bad. It is because change disrupts the equilibrium of any system, and relationships are systems. When one person in a relationship changes their patterns, the whole structure has to adjust. For some relationships, that adjustment is natural and even welcome. For others, the adjustment will reveal that the relationship was built on dynamics that no longer serve either person. This is one of the more difficult passages of the work this book describes, and it deserves to be addressed with full honesty. Not every relationship in your life will survive the version of you that stops performing. Some people were in your life specifically because of your willingness to absorb, to accommodate, to never push back. When you stop offering those things in unlimited supply, they experience it as loss, and they may respond with confusion, guilt, withdrawal, or even criticism. That response, as painful as it can be, is information. It tells you the nature of what was being exchanged. The relationships that survive, and more than survive, deepen, are built on something more durable than your agreeableness. They are built on genuine respect, on shared values, on the kind of honest care that does not require you to be small in order to function. Consider what those relationships look like in practice. A friendship that can survive you saying, "I've been overextended and I need to step back for a while," and responds with understanding rather than accusation, is a friendship built on real care. A professional relationship in which you can say, "I disagree with this direction and here's why," and be heard rather than punished, is a professional relationship built on genuine respect.
A partnership in which both people can hold limits, express needs, and sit in the occasional discomfort of honest conversation is a partnership built on something that will actually last. These relationships don't require you to perform. They require you to show up. There is a difference that is worth everything.
Chapter 10. There is a version of your life that does not require your silence to function. It does not require you to swallow your real opinion before it reaches your throat. It does not require you to give your most valuable hours to obligations you never genuinely chose. It does not require you to manage everyone else's feelings before you are permitted to attend to your own. It does not ask you to be smaller, quieter, or less certain of yourself in order to be loved, respected, or included. That version of your life is not a fantasy. It is a direction, and every chapter of this book has been pointing toward it. You began this journey understanding the difference between nice and good, that the performance of agreeableness is not the same as the practice of character. You traced the roots of the approval habit back to where it was first installed, and you saw it clearly for what it became, a strategy that once served you, deployed long past the point where it was useful. You counted the real cost of overgiving, not in the abstract, but in the specific daily currency of your time, your focus, your energy, and your sense of self. You understood that your word is a reflection of your integrity, and that honoring your commitments begins with being honest about what you can actually offer before you offer it. You discovered that the uncomfortable pause, that quiet moment between a question and a real answer, is not social failure, but the first act of a person who respects both themselves and the people they are speaking to. You learned that a limit is not a wall between you and the people you love. It is a foundation beneath the relationship. That managing other people's emotions for them is often the kindest looking form of disrespect. And that the quiet strength you've been reading about, the kind that doesn't announce itself, that doesn't need external validation, that is simply present and unshakable, is built from all of those smaller practices, compounded over time. And you faced the hardest part, the reality that not every relationship will survive your honesty. That some people in your life were there for the performance, not the person. That letting those relationships shift or end is not a failure of love, it is an act of it. What you are left with after all of that is something rare. A life in which your yes means something because your no is real. A life in which the people around you experience your generosity as genuine because it comes from a place that is not depleted. A life in which your opinions are sought because they are known to reflect what you actually think. A life in which you are not liked by everyone, but deeply trusted by the ones who matter. A life in which your energy goes where your values point, rather than where other people's expectations direct it. This is what it means to be good, not soft. Not harder, not colder, not more distant from the people you care about. Simply more real, more present, more aligned with the person you were always capable of being, the one that the performance of niceness was quietly displacing year by year, yes by yes. There will be moments ahead when the old pull returns, when the easier path is to agree, to absorb, to let something go that deserved to be named. Those moments are not signs that you have failed or regressed. They are simply the texture of a life lived among other people. People who have their own needs, their own patterns, their own history with the version of you that was easier to be around. In those moments, you do not need to be perfect. You need to be honest. One honest choice at a time, the new pattern replaces the old one. The work is quiet. The work is consistent. The work is entirely yours. No one else can do the thing this book is ultimately asking you to do,
which is to decide with full clarity and without apology that your life deserves to be lived by you, not managed for the comfort of others, not curated for the approval of people who were never truly invested in your actual flourishing. You are a working professional, an entrepreneur, a person building something real in your career, in your family, in your community. You do not have the luxury of wasting your most finite resources on relationships and obligations that do not serve your genuine growth or the genuine good of the people around you. Your time is too short. Your potential is too real. The people who need the best version of you, your work, your family, your community, deserve more than the depleted, performance-managing version. They deserve the version that is present because it is whole, generous because it is rested, honest because it is secure, dependable because it is intentional. They deserve the good version, not the soft one. And so do you. That version of your life does not begin someday. It does not begin when the circumstances are easier, when the relationships are less complicated, when the professional pressures let up. It begins in the next conversation where you pause before answering, in the next commitment where you check your reserves before you give, in the next moment where a limit needs to be named and you name it, clearly, warmly, without apology. It begins in the next 5 minutes. You already have everything you need. Now go be good.